Let me begin by admitting that this week I've kind of been somewhat of a head case because of the many things going on in the world, in the church, in my life. And those things were all over the place, and so I tended to be that way as well. The situation that has now come to fruition in the Ukraine has been a concern of mine for a number of months, weeks, and it goes far beyond Ukraine. It is, I just think there are a lot of things it represents, and perhaps more behind it than we know, that concern me. And then in the church, we've had a number of sudden, rather unique illnesses that have affected families, individuals, and deaths. Sylvia Baker Davis passed away. She was a regular over here. And then in our own personal life, Jean and I have been wrestling and struggling, and some of you know what this is like. We have a pet, a beloved pet that's at the end. And of course, there's a lot involved in that. I mean, I know that those of you who've been through that understand the ups and downs and the emotions that are concurrent with the passing of a pet. So, if you think of all that, and then you look at the shotgun effect of my scriptures that were all over the place, leading me back to the original one I should have stuck with, but maybe, you have to go through all the others to get to where you belong. That of the Transfiguration story, the last of the Epiphanies. We've had during the season of Epiphanies all these aha moments where Jesus reveals who he is through miracle or message or different event, and this is the biggest one. Guillermo read the story, and I'll repeat some of it. Jesus takes a close cadre, a tight circle of his disciples up the mountain. It is the highest mountain on the Jezreel Valley. You can see it as you come up from the west. You know of it as you turn towards Damascus at the Sea of Galilee. It lies between Nazareth and Galilee. And there on the top of it, and 1 minute, it's just Jesus, and the next minute there are bookends around him. You have Moses, the great lawgiver, and you have Elijah, the Hall of Fame prophet. It's so astounding, and it's understandable that this amazed the disciples, and Peter in particular, so greatly that he said, we've got to do something here. We've got to enshrine it. We have to keep it here forever and for anyone who might come and want to see this. And you know what? When you have those kinds of highs, that's a natural thing, isn't it? Who could blame him for wanting to keep it? Let the good times roll. However, that's not the way the narrative ends, at least not in Matthew. Because there the text says they have this high moment at the top of this mountain, and I imagine them experiencing it as they face the future. They face Jerusalem and what lies ahead, and the text says they go down. They go down the mountain from that high back into the nitty-gritty, down and dirty real life. Real life. Real life where it's not one or the other. Real life is where people live and die. They achieve great things and turn around and fail. Real life where they care and then the next moment we don't. Down from where they had experienced the highest of highs, the epiphany of epiphany, to enter and to walk towards the lowest of their lows, the crucifixion, betrayals, the valley of the shadow of death and darkness. No wonder there isn't that part of them says, can't we save some of this? Can't we just keep it clean? Can't we, keep one here and we go back to this one and forget about this one, You can't blame them, can you? But it reminds me, by saying they went back down, that life is not that clean or simple or distinct. Oh, we try to make it that way. We compartmentalize, we compartmentalize in our mind, work here, home here, this, that. We compartmentalize all the time. We categorize. One thing here, one thing there, this is good, this is bad, and we try to create these figurative walls of distinction and separation. But in reality, things bleed. They bleed to and into one another. They go under or over the artificial walls we try to create, and it happens this way because life is inseparable. Life includes and encompasses all of these things, everything, regardless of how we try to hold them distinctly separate and name them good or bad or up or down. People are not good or bad. You are not good or bad. The truth is, we are both. We are both. We have both good and bad in us. And we try to live by one and model one, and yet we know they bleed together just as all of life does. A number of years ago, I had an experience where after a wedding in my church, I was confronted by the bride's mother. And I just have to say, the mother of the bride is usually the most contentious individual to begin with in that process. And I was very surprised. I thought everything went quite well, but she was really in my face, and she was really angry. And the point she finally expressed that brought about her anger was that I had not been appropriately joyful enough during her daughter's wedding. And she might have been right, I don't know. You try to be professional, but that wedding was at 4 p.m, and at 11 o'clock that morning I had presided over a funeral. Maybe she was mad because then when they got worried about 2 events in one day, even though there's 4 hours, I said, don't worry about it. We'll push the coffin to the side if that's an issue. No, I didn't say that. But the person that I had presided over their memorial at 11 a.m., she was a longtime member of the church. She lived around the corner from the parsonage in which Jean and I and our young children lived. And she would walk, we'd see her out. She was just a kind, jovial individual. And our kids were at the age where when they were out or walking or playing, she would always greet them, sometimes give them things and run with them. And I was always impressed by that, given her age. And she loved to tell people in the church and everyone she knew that our oldest daughter, Katie, was named after her. So I did her funeral service in the morning, and that afternoon I performed the wedding. So maybe the mother was right. I don't know. You can only do your best. But my point is that life is not about achieving some clear delineation between what fills our day today that we say is good, or in other instances bad, beautiful or ugly, but the truth that they're always there, they blend together, it's not always clear, but that in either instance, we are called to maintain and retain what we understand to be the core values of our day-to-day that gets us through them, and more importantly, encourages us to act upon them, to respond to them. It's what we do to what we've experienced, or from what we've experienced, not the experience itself that really can be measured as good or bad, positive or negative. Over the last few years, I have found that preaching has become more and more difficult, probably as difficult as I've experienced in 40 years. Because everything has been politicized. And it continues to be. And yet, theologically speaking and personally sharing, my faith tells me that hunger, that poverty, that discrimination, that basic fundamental human rights are not political issues, they are human issues. They are human issues. Now, Jesus didn't ask these things of people. He just saw the humanity in them and ministered to it. And as such, these things need to be addressed. War is not a subject for politicians to invoke. War is a moral matter. War is a moral matter that involves real people who are forced to face the violence, the death, the destruction, and the displacement that are inevitable results of someone's greed or ego. I understand that for such things to be confronted, faced, and hopefully resolved, that these human issues have to grind through the machinations, the political machinations of governments and so forth. But those machinations are of human design. They are of human design. And what makes a difference as they grind their way through them are the values that we say we affirm. And those are the things that determine whether the resolution is good or bad. And what has happened, at least in my mind, it seems that in the last decade, last few years, that these values that should be a part of that whole process have just become optional. It even comes down to masks. And what I want to share is that, lies are not alternative facts. They're lies. Facts are not one analyst's opinion. They are facts, and the rest are opinions. Shakespeare said, a rose by any other name is still a rose. And a pig is the same thing. You see, friends, kingdoms and nations, whether you're looking in or outside the biblical narrative, kingdoms and nations over the whole span of time have come and gone. But the values by which we measure them are the immutable things that shouldn't change. I don't care what government you live under, you have to ask, different things work for different people. But you have to ask, what are the immutable values, the morals that drive them, that uphold them, that determine them, that lead them to a positive end? The immutable values that God has called people from every faith and every age, in every age, to think about and to be about and to integrate into our existence. This has been true from ancient prophets in the Hebrew nation to the Reformation preachers of 500 years ago, to Moses before Pharaoh, Jesus before Pilate, and the young man, do you remember the photo a few years back, the young man standing before a military tank in Tiananmen Square? Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? In other words, the church's responsibility, my responsibility, Christians' responsibility is not to dictate opinions or dictate their outcome, say in votes. but to continually remind us of the core values we claim, that should produce those outcomes. The core values we say that we live by individually and independently are or are not, will or will not be those that we decide to live by together. It was Deepak Chopra. Did I say his name right? Good. He wrote, "Enlightened leadership is spiritual if we understand spirituality not as religious dogma or ideology, but as the domain of awareness, where we experience truth, goodness, beauty, compassion, creativity, and insight, and then focus our attention on those things." Not so different from what the Apostle Paul said to those early Christians in the church at Philippi, where he writes, "Whatever is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, and worthy of our praise. Focus on these things." And Jesus, he's always so good at doing this. In his own succinct way, summarized it by saying, "It's not so hard, friends. It's not so hard, friends. Love God, love neighbor." Now notice, he doesn't give us the who, what, why, when, or how we should do that love God, love neighbor thing. He leaves it wide open. It's almost like he says, love God, love neighbor. That's what I tell you to do. Now figure it out. Man, we don't like that. We're always, especially the neighbor part, well, I'm going to love this person, not this person, that person. You know, we get into all these other things. It's really quite simple. Love God, love neighbor. The decisions you make as individuals and as a people, these things need to be at the forefront of that process. In Judaism, especially at Jesus' time, they had what were called phylacteries. These were little black boxes. You've probably seen them in pictures, or perhaps even now in contemporary times. Little, and sometimes, because Jesus had to say, you don't need a big one to prove anything. But they're black boxes that are tied around their head to keep the Shema, or the first commandment, in front of them all the time. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind. And the second is like that. Love your neighbor as yourself. To literally keep it in front of them as a reminder. You know, let's just be honest. We live in a world of our own creation. Yeah, we got the original creation, but what we've done with it, it's ours. It's our own making. It's our own creation. And in my mind, it has become a world where bullies have their way. Where people who can shout the loudest shout last. And the voice of Christ is relegated to the back room or silence. And I worry and I pray, but I don't know what lies ahead. I just know, and you can tell from what I've said and all this stuff this morning, I just know about the truths that seem to be bouncing around in my head. And those things, whether they're coherent or organized or not, those things need to be shared. They need to be said. For too long, I myself have been quiet. But the times demand more. In fact, I've been thinking about a series of sermons entitled 40 Sermons I Wish I Had Preached, 10 Sermons I Wish I'd Preached 40 years ago. And as I was mulling over how I would conclude today, I thought of Martin Luther. During the heat of the debate of the Reformation and the split of Protestantism from Catholicism, there is an event that occurs that as he is debating with someone else all the other stuff around Christianity and the ministry and the church and theology, at some point Martin Luther, being as hot as he was, took out a dagger and slammed it in the table. And he said, "Here I stand. I can do no other." Here I stand, I can do no other. We are at that time, friends, where it's time to think about that. Where do we stand? What do we do? How do we go forward? What are our values and our morals that we profess, and how do we live them in our lives, individually and together? Here I stand, I can do no other. And now it's up to you. Amen.